Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're taking a look at a book that's been making some waves. It's called Marriage Chains: How to Unshackle Yourself and Thrive by Conrad Riker.
Yeah, this one's definitely got people talking. It's pretty provocative.
Definitely. And it's specifically targeted at men who are feeling kind of disillusioned with marriage. Maybe feeling like the system is stacked against them.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting because it goes beyond just the typical relationship advice. It dives into like the history of marriage, the legal and financial structure.
Right, it's not just about communication or, keeping the spark alive.
No, it gets into some pretty heavy stuff, like this concept of the marriage industrial complex. Have you heard of that?
Honestly, I haven't really.
Yeah.
But it sounds kind of ominous, like some kind of conspiracy theory.
Well, it's not exactly a conspiracy theory, but Riker argues that there are all these societal forces that pressure men into marriage without fully explaining the potential downsides.
Okay, so it's like this invisible system that benefits from keeping men trapped in unhappy marriages. Or something like that.
Yeah, kind of like that. He talks about how marriage used to be more about practical things, like property rights and alliance.
Right. Makes sense, historically speaking.
Yeah, but then as societal values shifted and certain ideologies gained prominence, he argues that men's position within marriage started to erode.
So is he talking about like feminism and stuff?
Yeah, he specifically mentions Marxism, critical theories, feminism. He argues that these ideologies contributed to this imbalance of power within marriage, often at the expense of men.
Wow, that's a bold claim, and probably not going to sit well with everyone.
Definitely a controversial take, but it sets the stage for his analysis of the legal and financial risks of marriage, especially when it comes to divorce.
Okay, so this is where it gets real for a lot of guys.
Yeah.
Because we've all heard the horror stories about guys getting cleaned out and divorced.
Right, and Riker doesn't hold back. He lays out how the legal system can be used against men, particularly when it comes to things like financial settlements and child custody.
So he's saying it's not always a fair fight.
No, he argues that there are specific tactics women might use to gain an advantage in court. And he even gives examples, like pushing for temporary orders that restrict a man's access to funds early on.
So it's like they're already at a disadvantage before the divorce even starts.
Yeah, and he also talks about how financial decisions made during the marriage, even seemingly harmless ones, can be used against men later on.
So it's like you need to be thinking about the potential for divorce even when you're happily married, which is kind of a depressing thought.
Well, he's not saying you should be paranoid, but he does emphasize the importance of being aware of the risks and taking steps to protect yourself.
Like what kind of steps?
Well, for starters, he's a big advocate for prenuptial agreements. He says they're not just for rich people anymore. They can be a crucial tool for protecting your assets.
Okay, but what if you're already married and you didn't get a prenup?
He still stresses the importance of meticulous financial record keeping and also consulting with legal professionals who understand these nuances.
It's like knowledge is power.
Yeah, he wants men to go into marriage with their eyes wide open, understanding the potential pitfalls and knowing how to navigate the legal and financial landscape.
Makes sense. Because ignorance can be really costly in these situations,
Yeah.
especially when emotions are running high.
He even provides like breakdown of common legal traps men often fall into so they can spot the red flags and make more informed decisions.
Okay, so we've talked about the financial risks, but what about the emotional toll of divorce, especially when kids are involved?
That's another major area he delves into. He calls it the children catch-22, where men often face an uphill battle when it comes to custody and parental rights.
Yeah, because society still tends to view mothers as the primary caregivers, even though fathers are just as capable.
Right, and he talks about how this bias can play out in court and how men can be marginalized or even alienated from their children.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's a reality for a lot of guys out there.
He also goes into the issue of parental alienation, where one parent might try to intentionally damage the child's relationship with the other parent.
Wow, that's just awful.
Yeah.
We talk about adding insult to injury.
Yeah, it's a really tough situation. And he offers some advice for men who find themselves in that predicament.
Like, what can they do?
Well, he emphasizes the importance of being actively involved in your children's lives from the very beginning, documenting everything, like school events, doctor's appointments, just to prove your consistent involvement.
So it's almost like building a case, just in case things go south.
Yeah, and he also recommends seeking legal representation early on if you sense any attempts to limit your access to your children.
So being proactive is key.
Absolutely. He also talks about gathering character references from teachers, coaches, other adults who can attest to your role as a father.
So it's like having a support system in place to vouch for your character and your commitment to your kids.
Exactly. And he even goes into detail about specific legal strategies men can employ, like seeking court-ordered custody evaluations and gathering evidence to refute false accusations.
So it sounds like he's equipping men with the tools they need to fight for their rights as fathers,
That's exactly what he's doing. He's saying you don't have to just roll over and accept whatever the court decides. You have options, and you have the right to advocate for yourself and your children.
Okay, so we've talked about the challenges. But does he offer any solutions beyond just fighting it out in court?
He does, and that's what we'll get into in the next part. We'll explore his advice on personal growth, rebuilding after divorce, and even this concept of the red pill brotherhood for support.
Okay, now I'm intrigued because it sounds like he's not just focusing on the negative. He's actually offering a path forward, a way for men to reclaim their power and create a better future.
That's a great way to put it. And I think it's what makes this book so compelling. It's not just a doom and gloom rant about marriage. It's about empowering men to take control of their lives and make choices that align with their values.
Sounds like a message a lot of guys need to hear.
I think so.
Well,
and we'll dive deeper into those solutions in the next part.
Can't wait. Looking forward to it.
So we spent the last part really digging into some of the darker sides of marriage.
Yeah, some heavy stuff for sure. All the ways the system can work against men, especially when things go wrong.
Exactly. But you know, Riker doesn't just leave you hanging with all that negativity.
Right. Because what's the point of knowing all that if there's nothing you can do about it?
Exactly. He actually offers a lot of practical advice for men who are feeling trapped or who are going through a divorce.
Okay, so let's get into that. What does he suggest?
Well, one of the first things he talks about is the importance of hitting the reset button. Emotional.
Like starting fresh.
Yeah.
Kind of a mental detox.
Exactly. He calls it an emotional reboot. And it's all about reclaiming your power, boosting your self-esteem.
Okay, so it's not just about fixing your external circumstances.
Right.
It's about working on yourself from the inside out.
Right. Because often the biggest damage is done to our sense of self-worth.
Especially after a bitter divorce or a long period of feeling trapped in an unhappy marriage.
Yeah. And he encourages men to focus on personal growth, pursue passions they might have put on hold, set new goals that excite them.
So it's like a personal development guide woven into this critique of marriage.
Exactly. It's about taking back control of your life.
I like that. Because it's not just about complaining about the system. It's about empowering yourself to create a better life.
Absolutely. And one of the key ways he suggests doing that is by connecting with other men who understand what you're going through.
Okay, so this is where the Red Pill Brotherhood comes in.
Yeah, you got it. He talks a lot about the importance of finding a supportive community.
Because let's face it, men don't always have the same kind of emotional support networks that women do.
Right. We're often taught to just suck it up and deal with things on our own.
Which can be incredibly isolating and unhealthy.
Exactly. And Riker argues that men need a space where they can talk openly about their experiences, share their frustrations, offer each other advice and encouragement.
So it's about finding a tribe of guys who get it, who've been there, done that.
Exactly. It could be an online forum, a local men's group, even just a few close friends who understand the red pill philosophy.
The point is to have a safe space where you can be yourself. Express your vulnerabilities. Learn from others who've walked a similar path.
Yeah, it's about realizing you're not alone in this.
I can see how that would be incredibly valuable, especially when you're feeling lost and confused. Like you're the only one going through this.
And you know, it's not just about getting support, it's also about challenging the status quo, questioning the narratives that society feeds us about gender roles and relationships.
Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit. What exactly does it mean to be red pilled?
Well, it's a complex concept, but essentially it's about seeing the world through a different lens, one that often goes against conventional wisdom.
So it's about thinking critically, not just accepting everything you're told at face value.
Right. And for many men, it's a journey of self-discovery, where they start to question the assumptions they've always held about masculinity, about relationships, about society in general.
And that can be a really empowering experience.
Yeah.
Because it allows you to break free from those limiting beliefs.
Exactly. You start to see things more clearly. And you can make choices that are truly aligned with your own values.
So it's not about blindly following some ideology. It's about thinking for yourself.
Exactly. And it can be a challenging path, especially when it goes against what everyone else seems to believe.
But ultimately, it's about personal freedom,
Yeah.
taking control of your own life.
Right. And Riker argues that this red pill perspective is essential for men who want to navigate the complexities of modern marriage and relationships.
Okay, so we've talked about the red pill philosophy, the importance of brotherhood. But what about more practical advice for men who are struggling in their marriages or who are facing divorce?
Well, he gets into that too. He has a whole section on communication and negotiation.
Because even if you're heading for divorce, you still have to communicate with your spouse,
Right.
especially if you have kids together.
Exactly. And he stresses the importance of being assertive, communicating your needs clearly, and setting boundaries.
So it's about standing up for yourself, but doing it in a way that's respectful and constructive.
Right. He even provides specific scripts for handling difficult conversations, like negotiating child custody arrangements, or dividing assets.
That's really helpful because those can be incredibly stressful situations.
Yeah. And he also emphasizes the importance of emotional control. Don't let your emotions get the best of you.
Because that's when people make mistakes.
Yeah.
Say things they regret.
Right. And he encourages men to seek therapy or support groups if they need help processing their emotions.
So it's about taking care of your mental health as well as your legal and financial interests.
Exactly. Because divorce can be incredibly traumatic, and it's important to have a support system in place.
Okay, so we've talked about communication negotiation, but what about this alpha male archetypes that he keeps mentioning?
Yes. That's a big part of his philosophy, too.
To be honest, I'm a little hesitant to even go there because the whole alpha male thing has become so cliche and often misunderstood.
I get that. But Riker actually presents a more nuanced view of the alpha male.
Okay, I'm curious to hear his take.
Well, he argues that the alpha male, in its true form, embodies positive qualities like confidence, leadership, a strong sense of purpose.
So it's not just about being aggressive or dominant.
No, it's about being the best version of yourself, both physically and mentally.
It's about owning your power and using it in a positive way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he encourages men to cultivate their strengths, embrace their masculinity.
Okay, so far so good. But how does this tie into marriage and relationship?
He argues that by tapping into this alpha energy, men can become more attractive to women, more successful in their careers, and more fulfilled in their lives overall.
So it's about personal growth
Yeah.
and self-improvement.
Exactly. And it's not about putting others down. It's about raising your own standards and inspiring others to do the same.
I can see how that would be appealing to a lot of men, especially those who are feeling lost or disillusioned.
You know, he even delves into the evolutionary psychology behind this.
Okay, now you're really getting into controversial territory.
I know. But it's actually quite fascinating. He talks about how these alpha traits were essential for survival in our ancestral past.
So he's saying it's not just a social construct, it's rooted in our biology.
Exactly. And he argues that we can't just ignore these innate drives and instincts.
But how do we reconcile those primal urges with the demands of modern society?
That's the challenge, isn't it? And he doesn't claim to have all the answers, but he does offer some guidance on how to integrate these different aspects of ourselves.
So it's about finding a balance between our primal nature and our modern sensibilities.
Exactly. And that's a journey that each man has to undertake for himself.
Well, this is definitely giving me a lot to think about, and I'm sure our listeners are feeling the same way.
I hope so, because this is really just scratching the surface.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, into the red pill, the alpha male, all that.
Yeah.
But I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, the whole legal aspect of marriage and divorce.
Right, because knowledge is power, especially when it comes to navigating the legal system.
Exactly. And Riker really gets into the nitty-gritty of how to protect yourself, especially during a divorce.
Yeah, he calls it legal warfare for a
And
reason.
we talked about those temporary orders that can really screw a guy over financially right out of the gate.
Right, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. He talks about how false accusations can be used as leverage in custody battles.
Oh, man. Yeah, I've heard some horror stories about that.
It's a real problem, and even if the accusations are later proven false, the damage can already be done.
Right. Your reputation, your relationship with your kids, it can all be destroyed.
Exactly. And he also talks about how women might try to manipulate the system to gain an advantage in property division or alimony payments.
It's like the legal system becomes a weapon in the wrong hands.
Yeah, that's a strong way to put it. But he's not saying all women do this. Of course not.
Right. But he's saying men need to be aware of the potential for manipulation.
Exactly. And he offers specific strategies for combating these legal maneuvers.
Okay, so what's the best defense?
Documentation, documentation, documentation. Keep records of everything. Financial transactions, interactions with your children,
Yeah.
any evidence that contradicts potential accusations.
So basically cover your ass.
Pretty much. He even suggests recording conversations where legally permissible, of course.
Wow, it's like going into battle armed with a file cabinet.
Sometimes you have to, You want to protect yourself.
But wouldn't that create a really adversarial environment? Like if you're constantly suspicious of your spouse?
He acknowledges that, but he argues that sometimes being prepared for a fight is the best way to avoid one.
Interesting. So it's like a deterrent. If your spouse knows you're not going to be easily manipulated, they might be less likely to try anything shady.
Exactly. And he also emphasizes the importance of proactive communication and assertive negotiation, even in the midst of a divorce.
Because even when things are falling apart, you still have to communicate,
Yeah.
especially if you have kids.
Absolutely. And he provides a framework for communicating your needs clearly and firmly without resorting to anger or aggression.
So it's not about being a jerk. It's about being assertive.
Exactly. He talks about using I statements, focusing on solutions, setting clear boundaries.
Sounds like a good approach for any kind of conflict, really.
Yeah, these are valuable skills to have in any relationship.
Now, we've talked a lot about divorce, but what about guys who are trying to save their marriage? Does Riker have any advice for them?
He does. He has a whole section on what he calls covert contracts.
Covert contracts. That sounds kind of intense.
Well, it's not as dramatic as it sounds, but it's basically the idea that many marriages operate under unspoken agreement.
Okay, I'm listening.
And these agreements are often rooted in traditional gender roles or societal expectations.
So it's like this unwritten script that we're all following.
Right. And the problem is that these covert contracts can become really problematic when one partner feels like they're carrying more than their fair share of the burden.
So it's like this invisible power dynamic that can lead to resentment and imbalance.
Exactly. And often these contracts are never explicitly discussed. They just kind of evolve over time.
So how do you even know if you have a covert contract with your spouse?
He provides a series of questions for couples to explore together, like who makes most of the decision? Who does most of the housework and childcare? Whose career takes priority?
Okay, so it's about bringing those unspoken expectations to the surface.
Exactly. And once you've identified the covert contracts in your marriage, then you can start to renegotiate the terms.
So it's about creating a more equitable and balanced relationship.
Right. And he emphasizes that both partners need to be equally committed to this process.
Because it's a two-way street.
Exactly. And he acknowledges that sometimes, despite everyone's best efforts, a marriage might still reach a point of no return.
Right. And in those cases, he says it's crucial to seek legal counsel and protect your interests.
Exactly. But the goal is to empower men to make informed choices, whether that means fighting for their marriage, navigating a divorce, or choosing to remain single.
It's about taking control of your life and creating a future that aligns with your values.
Exactly. And for those who want to delve deeper into these concepts and explore Riker's strategies in detail, you can find Marriage Chains: How to Unshackle Yourself and Thrive on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
Awesome. Well, this has been a really thought-provoking deep dive. I know I've learned a lot, and I hope our listeners have too.
Me too. It's a lot to process. But ultimately, it's about empowering men to create happier, healthier, more fulfilling lives.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, that's all the time we have for today, but keep the conversation going. Head over to our website to share your thoughts and connect with other deep divers.
And as always, thanks for listening.
And keep diving deep.